Hello, everyone, and welcome to Orthodoxy. My name is Andy Schmidt, and I am here with another podcast. You can tell what this is about by the name of it. It's going to be an interesting podcast. It's going to be fun. I just voted. It's Election Day, recording this on Election Day. I love Election Day. I've always loved it. It makes you feel like a true patriot. I love going out and voting, and it's a cool opportunity. I think it's a cool responsibility that we get as American citizens to be able to have a say in what happens in our government. And so Election Day is a very, very fun day for me. It's not as catastrophic for me as it has been in the past for certain people on both sides of the aisle, which I think is probably a good approach as a Christian. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't put some serious thought into the election, serious thought into what we believe politically and what we think should happen politically, because as I've said for months and months on this podcast, your political philosophy is directly related to your theological convictions, what you think is theologically true, what you think is true about Jesus, what you think is true about God. That's been one of the things that I've hit on for the last 6 months, 7 months, ever since kind of I broke away from Nick and High Point, and ever since they decided to partner with a church that is promoting homosexuality, that is promoting abortion, murdering children, that is supporting transgender ideology. I thought, well, that's a problem. Somebody should probably talk about this. And since the podcast has grown, I kind of did the math, and I put together all of the statistics over the last, since January of this year, kind of saying, okay, how many people have listened, or how many views and downloads and streams have I gotten? And it's between 60 and 80,000 over the last 11 or so months. And so that's pretty cool. And so I thought, I have an opportunity here to talk about something that's important on Election Day. Maybe to a lot of people, maybe not. Who knows how many people will listen to this. Each podcast is different. Each episode is different, but I have a cool opportunity here to talk to a lot of different people about the election. And so I thought I'd take that opportunity and have a conversation about it. So of course the podcast title is that you cannot be a Christian and vote for a Democrat. You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat. And I think that's fundamentally true. I'm going to give a multitude of reasons why that's true. I'm going to call some people out. I'm going to call some churches out here. Actually, I'm going to call one church out here in Madison. Nobody probably knows which church that is, but I'm going to call them out later on in this podcast. So you can kind of guess and try to figure out who that's going to be. It's a huge mystery. Who would I call out in Madison? What church, what pastor would I call out? I don't know. Anyways, there's a couple of reasons that I want to give, and some things that I want to show on this podcast that I think are incredibly important as Christians go out to vote today and think about who they're going to vote for. I went back and forth on whether or not I was going to vote for Trump for a little while there, as he wasn't as hard on the abortion stuff as I wanted him to be. I wanted him to advocate for a full abortion ban, a federal abortion ban, and he didn't. But with how things have gone over the past 4 or 5 months, I think that there's good reason to vote for Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump, and there's good reason to not vote for Kamala Harris, and I want to lay those out. And so the first thing, obviously, is the abortion pro-life issue. And so one of the things that one of the only things that Kamala Harris has actually been straightforward on is her very, very, very strong conviction that she thinks it is good, right, beautiful, amazing to slaughter human beings, that she thinks it is a good thing to murder children, to cut them up, to poison them, to sever their heads from their bodies, to tear their limbs off of their bodies, to poison them in the womb. She thinks that's like one of the only things. If you had to say, hey, what does Kamala Harris believe in most? What's the biggest part of her campaign? It's she believes that we should murder children, and that's what she's been very clear on throughout her entire campaign, which has been not very long, but it's also been very clear throughout her entire career in politics that she has no convictions at all, except for that she wants to murder children. And so that is obviously a problem. Of course, Tim Walz has similar ambitions, similar convictions to Kamala Harris, and he's been very, very clear that he thinks it's good and right to slaughter human beings, to murder children, and so there's one thing that I wanted to talk about. So there's this. I'll try to share my screen here. So there's a article by The Hill that came out here a little while back when J.D. Vance and Tim Walz were debating. And as some of you might know, I was part of the Dr. Scott Jensen for Governor campaign over in Minnesota a couple years back when Scott Jensen was running against Tim Walz. So I'm pretty familiar with Tim Walz, and he is probably the most progressive, the most radical Democrat in the country, maybe one of them, top three for sure, top three, top five, but he is incredibly radical, and his stance on abortion is just disgusting. It's barbaric. It's evil. It is the most vile and wicked stance on abortion that anybody could possibly have. And he believes that babies, you should be able to murder a child even after they're born. If you're trying to get an abortion and the abortion failed, you accidentally didn't murder your kid, and then you give birth to this kid, that he actually thinks that you should still be able to murder the kid after that. And so I want to just kind of shed some light on that. So here's an article from The Hill as it kind of explains some of the laws that have been put in place under Tim Walz and kind of the history there and what he believes. And of course, this is what he believes. This is what Kamala Harris believes. This is what the Democrats believe in. This is what they advocate for. So they are totally in on murdering children. And so I'll start reading here. It says, but here are the relevant facts. In 1976, the Minnesota state legislature approved a measure to protect children who survive abortions. The statute declared that a live child born as a result of an abortion shall be fully recognized as a human person and accorded immediate protection under the law, and that all reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken to preserve the life and health of the child. Okay, so that all sounds fine and good. That was 1976. So later in 2015, the Minnesota legislature passed the Born Alive Infants Protection Act, which, among other things, defined, quote, born alive infants as, quote, every infant member of the species Homo sapiens who is born alive at any stage of development. Okay, so the act also made minor language tweaks to all three subdivisions of the original 1976 statute, while adding 6 new subdivisions to cover civil penalties for medical personnel who did not provide adequate care, privacy protections for court proceedings related to born alive infants, and the status of born alive infants who survive following an abortion procedure. That is a report from the Dispatch's Alex Demas. Fast forward a couple of years, between January 1st, 2019 and December 31st, 2022, the Minnesota Department of Health recorded and reported 8 cases in which infants were born alive during abortion procedures. None of the children survived. Moreover, of 5 born alive cases reported between January 1st and December 31st, 2021, the Minnesota Department of Health said, quote, no measures taken to preserve life were reported. For 3 of them, then came the fall of Roe v. Wade. In 2023, Walz signed a legislation repealing all 6 subdivisions added to the state's 1976 statute by the 2015 Born Alive Infants Act, or Infants Protection Act. The post-Roe legislation also removed 2 of the 3 original subdivisions, including in the 1976 measure, leaving only a single subdivision with heavily revised language. The portion of the law that still remains originally read as follows, emphasis zone, quote, a live child born as a result of an abortion shall be fully recognized as a human person and accorded immediate protection under the law. All reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken to preserve the life and health of the child. After Walz revisions, the remaining provisions now reads a bit differently. So here's what it says now. It says, quote, an infant who is born alive shall be fully recognized as a human person and accorded immediate protections under the law, all reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records. Now, this is where it changes, shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel to care for the infant who is born alive. Now, it says you will notice that the requirement of treatment to, quote, preserve the life and health of the child is now missing. So now you don't have to preserve the life and health of the child. This is not by accident. The edit was deliberate and done with consideration. Anyone suggesting that the change in the language does not or doesn't allow for what it clearly allows. Anyone suggesting that the change in language doesn't allow for what it clearly allows is not being honest with you. While we're at it, it is risible that abortion advocates want us to believe, on one hand, that Georgia's extremely clear fetal heartbeat law is too vague for risk-averse doctors to understand, and on the other hand, that changing, quote, to preserve the life and health to, quote, to care for the infant who is born alive does not intentionally create an implicit permission structure. Okay, so on October 1st, during the vice presidential debate, Walz flat out denied that specifics of the legislation he had signed into law. The debate moderators, CBS News' Norah O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan, who had earlier attempted to, quote, fact-check Vance on illegal and illegal immigration, made no effort to challenge or even contextualize Walz's repeated denials. So this is obviously basically what it's saying is that they changed the language in the law, and what that has basically caused is many late-term failed abortions that have then meant that the baby is born, and now the Minnesota doctors, and this happened between 10 and 20 times in Minnesota in the past couple of years, will take that baby, they'll put him in a crib, in a room, alone, they'll wrap him up and, kind of make it the environment cozy, and then let the kid die. And so that's what's happening in Minnesota. You can check their own statistics say this, and I'll put the link to those in the description. They report on this. They are doing this. This is actively happening in the state of Minnesota, all put in place by Tim Walz. This is part of his rhetoric. This is part of his agenda. This is part of what he wants. This is part of what he desires. He thinks this is good. He thinks this is the future, the progressive future of America is murdering children and letting them starve to death after they're born, after you've already botched a murder attempt before that. And so obviously, that's one reason why I don't think you could be a Christian and vote for a Democrat. Actually, why you cannot be a Christian and vote for a Democrat. You cannot vote for people who want to slaughter human beings after they've been born, who want to leave them there to die, to starve to death. You cannot be a Christian and do that. So if you're voting for a Democrat, or if you're planning on voting for a Democrat, and you also call yourself a Christian, you're lying to yourself. And there isn't you can't plead, oh, ignorance, I was ignorant, I didn't know that this was true, blah, blah, blah. Who much is given, much is required in America. You have all of the opportunity to go find the truth and the facts related to these issues. Most Christians that I know that are voting for Democrats are willfully ignorant and willfully not looking into the issues because they don't actually want to know what's happening politically and in policy related to the candidate that they're voting for, because they're cowards, because they don't actually care about the truth, a lot of them. And actually, I knew a couple of people, mostly women at the church that I used to go to, who voted for Joe Biden. And that was just reprehensible, disgusting behavior. And I think those people have proven over the years that they aren't actually Christians. They've proven themselves to be very fake, very kind of outward. Yeah, I'll give you the rhetoric and the language that relate to kind of what Jesus would say, and manipulate the words in Scripture, and I'll make it seem like I'm a Christian, but obviously behind closed doors, I'm going to go vote for and advocate for things that are absolutely against what Jesus said, absolutely against what the Scriptures said. I'll repeat the same verse that I've been repeating for months. Jesus said, for anybody who leads a child astray, it would be better if a millstone were tied around their neck and that they were thrown into the sea than for them to lead the child astray. And part of that is voting for these sorts of people who are going to put this policy in place. And that's exactly what a lot of Christians are doing. And so that's the first and probably the main reason why I'm saying you cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat. There's no question about this. There's no theological debate surrounding this. There's no moral debate. There's no even political debate. I mean, really what it comes down to is two entirely diametrically opposed worldviews. One of them says, we want to slaughter children. We want to murder kids. We want to sacrifice these kids to Moloch. We want to give our kids up for our careers because we hate humanity. We hate human beings. I mean, that's the Democrat Party. And then the Republican Party, on the other hand, is taking a more populist stance on broadly. I mean, there's a lot of very conservative Republicans that are just full on anti-abortion, but kind of the more populist Trump, Vivek, RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, some of these major figures that have kind of come together and formed this Republican populist party that we're seeing right now. They are taking the stance of, I think kind of 13-week abortion ban, leave it to the states, let the states decide it. I don't think that that's a good decision, but I think it's a hell of a lot better than putting babies who have been born out of a botched abortion in rooms and letting them starve to death. Okay. So we talk about the lesser of two evils. That's the lesser of two evils, not voting for the person who is going to murder children. And so that would be Kamala Harris. That would be Tim Walz. It's not a question. There's no questions around this. It's actually happening. You can look at the data and the statistics, and I'll put them in a link in the description to this podcast for those of you who aren't cowards, for those of you who actually want to know what's happening. I think there's a lot of people out there who actually want to know what's happening. But there's a lot of people who don't. They don't want to know what's happening, so they're going to turn a blind eye, and they're going to pretend like both parties are the same on. They're both the same on abortion. There's nothing different. No, there is difference. There is a difference, and there's a lesser of two evils here. The lesser of two evils is the one group that doesn't want to murder a bunch of kids after they've been born. The more evil person, the more evil group, the more evil ideology is the one that's producing murder, and that leads into point number 2 of why you cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat. I mean, this is kind of comical, but it's crazy that I even have to say it. But the Democrats have produced people who tried to murder a human being, tried to murder Donald Trump. Now, that's not very surprising based off of what I just said about abortion. Of course, the Democrats are producing many, many people who are trying to murder babies, which I think is way worse than even trying to murder an adult, a grown man. I think both things are horrible, but I think it's a lot worse to murder a baby than it is to murder a grown man. Again, both things are disgusting and evil, but they're producing their anti-human rhetoric, their anti-human ideology are producing anti-human results. Who would have thought? Who would have thought if you have a political ideology that says it's okay to murder babies, that people would say, oh yeah, if it's okay to murder babies, then why can't I just go and murder Donald Trump because I don't agree with him? Why can't I just go do that? If you have a political party that's saying that Donald Trump is Hitler, that he's a Nazi, that all of his followers are Nazis, and Nazis were bad. We all know that Nazis were bad, right? I mean, I hope that we can all agree that the Nazis were bad. I know some people can't figure that out, but the Nazis were really bad. They murdered a bunch of people. They murdered a bunch of Jews. If you got a political party who is saying Trump and all of his supporters, they're Nazis, it's Hitler. I mean, the legacy media was putting stuff out about Trump that he's Hitler, that he's just like Hitler. And then they go try to kill him twice. They go try to shoot him and murder him. And they end up murdering a supporter of his at one of his rallies in Pennsylvania. Just a firefighter with a family who saved his family while he was taking the bullet for them. They slaughtered they murdered somebody. This is what the rhetoric of the left produces. Your language, your ideas, they actually matter. The left knows that. They don't care that they almost killed Trump because they think that Trump is Hitler. And a lot of them want him dead. And if your political philosophy is producing that sort of action, is producing that sort of disgusting, reprehensible, evil, vile, wicked action of trying to go and slaughter and murder a political candidate, you're in the wrong party. You have the wrong political ideology, actually, and you should change. And so that's that is in line with kind of the pro abortion, pro murdering kids thing. I mean, a lot of the Democrat policy and a lot of the Democrat rhetoric, ideology, philosophy produces a anti-human, pro-murdering civilization, a pro-murdering society. And we've seen that. We've seen that in a million ways. I mean, you can see it in the defunding the police movement, which was a complete sham, all built off of a complete and utter lie on the George Floyd stuff. They defunded the police, and more people have died. More people have been hurt in Minnesota and Minneapolis. I mean, it's an absolute. I mean, it's a terrible. It went from a beautiful city, an amazing city, one of the best cities in America, to kind of a hellhole. I mean, you can't go to certain parts of Minneapolis. I lived there for about 2 years, maybe over 2 years. There's certain areas that you just can't go to because there's no police officers and there is violence there, and it's a bad, bad place. And that's what happens when you don't have law and order. People die. And it's crazy that I have to say this on a podcast, that there are people on the internet, there are Christians, there are churches who are not saying these objectively true things. You can't argue with any of these. These are just objective. These are just stats. These are facts about what's happening as a result of the Democrat rhetoric, the Democrat ideology, and the Democrat policy. And I don't think I should have to come on a podcast and tell people, hey, you can't be a Christian and vote for people who want to murder a bunch of people. Like, you know, it's like if we lived in the 1940s, somebody going on a radio show saying, hey, Christians, just so you know, you cannot be a Nazi and be a Christian at the same time. You cannot murder Jews and be a Christian at the same time. Like, actually, I said it in the last podcast with Sarah Patterson about CareNet and the abortion issue in Madison. I think I said it in that podcast, but I've said it before, that actually what the Democrats have produced in terms of murder and in terms of killing innocent people is way worse than what the Nazis produced. It's a statistical fact. The Nazis, 11 million Jews and probably 100 some million people across the board as far as World War II goes. And the Democrats over the past 50, 60 years, 70 million babies alone. And that's just the ones that are reported. And that's also not including IVF. That's where you kill a bunch of babies for IVF, which is an unchristian thing. And if you are a Christian and you think that IVF is okay, you're an ignorant person and you need to go do some research. That's the eggs that don't get chosen just expire, and those are real human beings. And so those are human beings. We'll do that in a different podcast because I want to talk about that more, but they're not talking about IVF. They're not talking about Plan B and the pill. They're not talking about any of those things. It could be in the hundreds of millions over the past 50 or 60 years. And it probably is actually. There's actually no doubt that it is. There's certain states, New York and California, that don't actually tell us what their abortion statistics are. And those are two massive states with a lot of people who are actually having abortions in real life. And so we don't know to the extent of what the Democrats have produced as far as abortion goes. We don't know, I would love for somebody, I'm sure it's impossible to take all the Democrat policy over the past 50 years and see how many deaths they've produced. I'm sure it's in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions. Worldwide in the United States. I mean, their policy is constantly producing death and murder. I mean, that's what's happening constantly in the Democrat policy. Defunding the police and the pullout in Afghanistan, which was just a disaster and left billions of dollars of really expensive, really good American military equipment for a bunch of terrorists to use for whatever they want. The war in Ukraine that definitely would not have happened under Trump because it didn't happen under Trump and because Putin waited till Trump was out of office so that he wouldn't get any pushback from the United States. Or you have the issues in Israel in which the Palestinians are 80-90% in support of Hamas's firing rockets into innocent Israeli civilians. And these are millions of people that have died just in the past couple of years. And then you also have the border in which, 10 million people, 20 million people, nobody even knows how many people have come through the border to come to America illegally. Now they're going to be voting in this election, which is unbelievably preposterous. I mean, you don't even have a democracy if you have a bunch of people, if you just let anybody in who agrees with you and say, hey, yeah, you can vote. You don't have to get citizenship. You don't have to do any of that. You can just vote, come and vote. If you're going to vote Democrat, you can come on in. Also, there's been many, many, many criminals from all of that, potentially millions of criminals. People have been murdered, raped. It's their policies or their lack of policy and their ideology and their rhetoric produces death That's what it's producing in real life. The statistics show it, but also your eyeballs are showing it too. Your eyeballs are seeing it as long as you're willing to open your eyes and not be an ignorant, low IQ, passive coward, which is what a lot of Christians are. They don't want to know what's happening politically. They think they can just abstract their responsibilities out to the government. I'll just give the money to the government. They'll take care of the poor. I'll just give the money, I'll give the money to my mega church and they'll just do whatever they want with it. And then I'll go and tell everyone, I'm a good Christian. I'm a godly person. No, you're not. You're not a godly person. Go and actually help in real life. Go and actually do something in real life. Go and actually talk to these people who are poor and the widows and the women who are struggling because they got pregnant and they need help. You cannot neglect your responsibility as a Christian and abstract everything out, have everybody else do everything for you, push your money out to different institutions, to the mega church, to the government, to everybody else to do the work that Christ called you individually to do. And that's the platform. That's the fundamental platform of the left, the platform, the philosophical worldview that produces the things that the left, that the Democrats are engaging with and that are promoting in policy and that are putting into law. This idea that the individual is worthless, you can't do anything unless you're part of the collective, and you need the government to do good works for you. You don't need to do it on your own. And it's an easy thing for lazy people to feel virtuous while voting for a Democrat. Lazy Christians, not actually Christians, fake Christians who are lazy, who don't actually want to follow the biblical commands. It's a really deceptive, really easy way. Toss your vote to a Democrat and feel like, hey, yeah, I think I'm doing a good thing. Some of my money is going to go to homeless shelters that don't work, or some of my money is going to go to, the poor, or we're going to steal money from the rich because everybody's oppressed, and the rich, they're just these oppressors who steal. They get all their money off the backs of the hardworking people like me who is too lazy to go talk to the poor and the widow and the orphan. So that's the platform of the Democrats. It's a diametrically opposed worldview to the Christian worldview. Jesus talks to you. He talks to the individual. He talks to me. He says, Andy, are you going to go and help the poor? Are you going to go and help the poor? Are you going to give your money? Are you going to go get the cash out of your wallet and give it to the organizations that are helping the people? Are you going to give it to the woman who is pregnant and she needs help? Are you going to go actually walk alongside her, actually disciple the homeless man? Are you going to do that? Or are you going to just toss that money at an institution that is several 1,000 miles away on the East Coast and say, hey, here, federal government, just take my money. I don't want to have it. I don't need to see where it goes, blah, blah, blah. Just give it to some poor country. Tell them it's from the American people. That's from me. That's God will love this. Jesus, that's not the biblical command. God demands that we as individuals act like individuals. We act like individuals, and then when the individuals make up a community, make up a group, a fellowship, that's called the local church. And the local church engages as individuals with different gifts, doing the good works of Christ, being equipped by the leaders in the church, and then going out and doing good works for the poor, doing good works in evangelism, doing good works for the orphans, for the widows. You cannot break these things apart. You cannot break your personal responsibility apart from the biblical command. That biblical command is for us as individuals. It's not for the government. So you'll hear a lot of people be like, well, you have to love the least of them. And that was one of the Democrat rhetoric at the debates and things. I think Walls used that, to the least of these. We have to love the least of these. That shouldn't be rhetoric that is uttered out of the mouth of a politician that's supposed to be representing 320 million people, especially because Tim Walz is saying, elect me to do the work of helping and loving the least of these. You don't need to do it yourself. Just elect me. I'll do it for you. Trust me. I'll do it. We'll do it for you. The Democrats will do it for you. Give us your money. Give us your votes. Give us the power. Give us all of the institutions. We'll do all of the work for you. You can be lazy. You can sit there. You can sit down and watch porn and go have sex with whoever you want to have sex with and murder babies and do all that stuff. And then, but you voted for a Democrat, or you can keep going to your church who kind of lies to you and tells you what you want to hear every single week and says, God is love every week. Hey, we're doing a sermon series on God is love again, because that's what the liberals talk about every week in their fake churches. And so the individual has responsibility. The Democrat Party is not interested in that idea. They're not interested in the idea that you are an individual. They're not interested in the idea that you have responsibilities as an individual. And if you have a proper theological conviction, if you read the scriptures properly, if you understand what Jesus means when he speaks and gives commands, right? Because in the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19 and 20, because there's a comma at the end of 19, contrary to what the people at Cru will tell you, Cru, Campus Crusade for Christ, they just stop it. They put a period at the end of 19 because verse 20 says we need to teach people to obey all that Jesus commanded, all that Christ commanded, all that I commanded is because Jesus is saying it, but obey all that Christ commanded. That's part of the Great Commission. It's not just you going and baptizing people and saying, hey, here's the gospel, here's the message, see you later. Saying, no, it's actually, there's a discipleship aspect. You have to disciple, you have to teach people to obey all that Christ commanded. That's part of the Great Commission. That's part of the gospel. That's part of the message of the Bible. And so that's an individual. So that's the theological truth. So anybody who comes along, whether that's a church, an institution, or the federal government or the state government that comes along and says, hey, I can do that for you. I can take those virtues that Jesus taught, and I can if you give me your money, if you give me power, if you give me your votes, if you give me the institutions, I can make you feel moral. I can make you feel moral. That's the rhetoric of the left. That's the policy of the left. That's the philosophy of the left. It's communism. It's socialism. It's totalitarianism. It's authoritarianism. It's you are a stupid individual. You're a lazy individual. We're going to let you live by your hedonistic desires, and we're going to tell you that we're going to do the virtuous thing for you. Of course, they aren't. They never do the virtuous thing. They never do the virtuous thing. Like I talked about before, their policy produces death. It produces murder. It produces war. It produces bad, terrible things. They never do the right thing. And so just more reasons why you cannot be a Christian and vote for a Democrat. It's a diametrically opposed worldview to the Christian worldview. You can't serve two masters. You're going to love one and hate the other. In this case, I think a lot of people who think that they're Christians in America, they love their liberal ideology more than they love Jesus Christ, because Jesus isn't a liberal. He doesn't abide by the liberal creed. He demands that each individual follow him. He demands that each individual obey him, each individual live in righteousness, each individual ask for forgiveness and live by the grace of Christ and is strengthened through the Holy Spirit and is driven towards God. That's what he demands of the individual. He says you can be equipped in the church. The local church is for equipping, but not for the doing the work of sanctification in you. That's your responsibility. You and Christ together, killing your flesh, killing your sin, and not being controlled by the world. And so there's many reasons why you can't be a Christian and vote for a Democrat. It's impossible. You shouldn't even attempt to do that. It's a very foolish thing. There's many reasons, but the main, I think it all comes down to kind of that sort of expressive individualism that we've talked about a lot in this podcast. Carl Trueman wrote The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. He discusses how we got to a point in society in which somebody can say, I'm a man trapped in a woman's body, and then everybody else can just affirm that. How did we get here? How did we get to that point where we can say something that sounds ridiculous? Like nobody would have ever thought to say that for a long, long time, and now we're saying that. And he goes through, 400 some years of philosophy, and he talks about Rousseau and Karl Marx and Darwin, and he comes up to kind of the modern time and how all these different philosophies has piggybacked off of each other over the past several centuries, and it's all culminated in what we now call expressive individualism, and the idea that who you are is expressed from the inside of you, that whatever you feel is technically, is in reality, is objectively who you are. And so if I think that I'm a woman, even though I'm a man, that's true, because what I feel is actually true, not what is tangible, not what is in the objective world around us. What is actually objective, they say, is what you feel on the inside. And so if I say that I'm a woman, everybody has to affirm me, because that's how I feel. And what I feel is the basis for all reality, not actually reality itself, but what I feel. And so it's we could get into the technicalities of all the language surrounding this stuff, but that's the Democrat worldview. That's what they're operating out of. It's a liberal, postmodern, expressive, individualistic worldview. And that isn't Christian. It can't be. It's not compatible with Christianity in any way, shape, or form. There's actually nothing true about the expressive individualist worldview. There's nothing true about the liberal worldview. There's nothing true, especially, liberal, negative liberal, just to be clear, the idea that, that freedom is, or liberty is the pursuit of whatever I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want, however I want, in whatever way I want, except for if I hurt somebody, which is kind of arbitrary. So that's negative liberty, and that's kind of the liberalism that they're talking about when Democrats talk about liberty and freedom. They mean the freedom to do whatever you want. When conservatives talk about liberty and freedom, they're saying a positive liberty. And positive liberty is the idea that you have the freedom to pursue virtue, that you have the freedom to pursue what is good, what is true, what is beautiful. And of course, positive liberty is contingent on a fundamental truth. So you have to know what's true. You have to know what's right. You have to know what's beautiful for you to be able to, in freedom, pursue it. And so you have to have a even deeper philosophy than positive liberty. You have to have a philosophy of what is real. You have to have a philosophy of what is true, what is ethically good. And if you don't have that, then you're going to pursue your positive liberty will turn into negative liberty, because your human nature is evil. And so you're going to pursue whatever you feel on the inside, which is going to be sinful and wrong. And so that's the difference, right? So when a conservative talks about liberty and freedom, and you can go look up these definitions, but conservatives talk about it in terms of freedom to pursue what is good, right, true, beautiful, what is virtuous. Democrats and liberals and progressives talk about it as the freedom to pursue whatever you want, whenever you want, with whoever you want, however you want. And those are different things. Those are wildly different things. And you cannot be a Christian and vote for Democrats. You cannot be a Christian and be a Democrat. You cannot be a Christian and support Democrats. They're not the same thing. I'll end this here. I'll end this after this next segment. I want to read through a passage in the Bible that always is a difficult one to read, because it's incredibly true. It's almost striking. It kind of jumps out at you when you're reading through it. It's in Romans 1, and it talks about the kind of the degradation of the human person. How does a person just become so sinful, so sick? How does that happen? Can that happen? And Paul explains kind of the order of operations. And it's in Romans 1, and I think that the way in which Paul describes this in Romans 1 is it's indicative of our culture at large, but I think it's certainly parallel to the Democrat Party. And so Romans 1, starting in verse 18, says this: "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in their lusts to their hearts. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. So, Romans 1:18 through 32, I think, is a passage that people need to read over and over and over and over and over and over again until it's ingrained in their mind and in their soul. Because that is what happens when you suppress the truth. And a lot of people, and again, we're talking about the individual. I'm talking to individual people here. I think that this can be kind of blown out into a more societal rule. But for the individual, you have to see how this starts. Verse 18 says, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. It's important that you recognize that it doesn't say that they by their unrighteousness they lie. That's not what it says. They don't lie first. They suppress the truth first. They ignore it. They suppress it. They pretend it doesn't exist. They push it down. They get rid of it. They suppress the truth. They don't lie. They just suppress the truth. And there's a deep connection between the suppression of the truth and a lie, but they're not the exact same thing. Suppressing the truth is in some sense lying to yourself, but you're still acknowledging in some capacity that it's the truth, that you just don't want to deal with it. Okay. So they suppress the truth. That's the first thing that they do. That's the first thing. That's what unrighteousness firstly produces, a suppression of the truth. And so suppressing the truth, you have to be careful of that in every aspect, in theology, in politics, philosophy, economics, in your personal relationships, and your friendships, in your church, wherever you are, in your relationship with your parents, whatever it is. If you're starting to suppress the truth, you're in a dangerous spot. And so you keep going through it, and it says, for although they knew God, this is verse 21, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Again, this is kind of what this produces. I think the interesting thing here is it says, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Okay, you hear this all the time among liberals, whether they're in the church or outside of the church, but actually mostly in the church. The talk about the complexity of the political world. It's so complicated, so much complexity, complicated. That's like the liberal word of the day, complexity. Everything, politics is too complicated for you to understand. It's very hard for you to understand what politics, what does it mean? What are the policies? You can't read them. You're so stupid. How could you read? It's too complicated for you to read. Language is too complicated for you to understand. That is literally the rhetoric that comes from thinking that they're wise, they become fools. I mean, it's a postmodernism sort of ideology that words don't have meaning, and you become so intellectually extravagant, so intellectually elite that you start to begin to think that nothing has a meaning. And that's exactly what happens. And you see this in the church all the time, that things are too complicated to understand. Nothing really has any meaning, and you can't fully understand the policies, and blah, 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 blah. And these people, these pastors, I actually know some of them, and people who work in the church, it's just this rhetoric around politics is so complicated, when in reality, it's not actually really that complicated. Murdering babies is bad. It's evil and it's wrong. I decomplicated things for you. You're welcome. Murdering babies is wrong. Homosexuality is sin. Transgenderism is sin. These things aren't complicated to understand. When you don't want to understand them, you begin to tell yourself that it's complicated. That's what happens. So you've got kind of a preconceived ideology that you want to maintain, and you don't want to deal with the truth. And so you suppress it. But if it ever comes back up again, you tell yourself, this is just too complicated for me to understand, which is just a lie. You're lying to yourself. And so you, thinking that you're wise, you become a fool. You complicate everything. And so then, it says God gave them up to their lusts, and they exchange relations, so homosexuality and sort of sexual debauchery comes about, and then they have a debased mind. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossip, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. I mean, these things definitely describe a lot of what the Democrat Party is putting together. I mean, murder, I mean, that's obviously true. Deceit, they're constantly lying about things. They're gossips, they're slanderers. They obviously hate God. They've made that very clear on multiple occasions. They're boastful. They are inventors of evil. I mean, they're inventing new ways to murder babies. They're inventing new ways to murder old people. I mean, they're inventing evils, transgenderism, cutting people up, and it's like things that you never thought were actually could ever happen. They invent new evil, and they're disobedient to parents. They're foolish. I mean, think about the young liberals. I mean, they hate their parents. A lot of them. They're absolute fools. They're faithless. They're heartless. They're ruthless. They'll do anything. But I really want people to focus on verse 32 here, because this is, this shows just how far away Paul wants us to be from this sort of worldview, from this sort of life. He says, though they know God's righteous decree, right? So you and I, we know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. They deserve to die, right? Sinful people, sinners, we ourselves, we all engage in this at one point, and we all do engage in it to some capacity because we're still sinners as Christians. We deserve to die, but through the grace of Christ, we don't, and we're given eternal life for free. For free, we're given that. But those who don't take that eternal life, they do deserve to die, and they will die, and they will receive the wrath of God. It says here, they do not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them, right? So giving approval. Let me just make the case here. Giving approval to people who practice that is voting for a Democrat. You are giving approval. You are advocating for it. Giving approval is letting the church that you go to partner with ministries that advocate for these things. That's you giving approval. And that's horrific. I mean, that's like the end of this. So he starts with suppressing the truth, and then you end with giving approval to the truth. I mean, that's evil. It's not just that you're doing it. It's that you're actively trying to get other people to do it. You're actually going out and trying to create vile, sick, and wicked actions and ideas and desires, and you're pushing the stuff on people. You're shoving your ideology, cramming it down people's throats. And you're doing that when you vote for Democrats. Every time you vote for a Democrat, you're voting for this sort of thing. You're voting for this ideology. You're voting for this worldview, and you are in violation of Romans 1:32. You are giving approval to those things, to those who practice those things. You are giving approval to those. And so therefore you cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat. You can lie to yourself all day. You can lie to everybody else around you. There's a lot of people in the Madison area, because it's a very liberal area, that want to lie. You can listen to your pastor, who's theologically illiterate and a liar, and he wants to tell you that, oh, there's good people on both sides. There's not good people. There's good policy on both sides. There's not good. I've yet to hear people say there's bad policy on both sides. There's unbiblical policy. I've yet to hear a single person tell me what bad policy there is on the Republican side. For years, I've never heard anybody say it. I could tell you what I just showed you earlier what bad policy was on the Democrat side. I've never heard somebody give a good example of bad policy on the Republican side that actually goes against the biblical statutes and commands. I've never heard it one time. And I would love for somebody to try to tell me that there is objectively unbiblical, immoral policy being put into place by Republicans. So those are the points. And I just wanted to end with that Romans 1 verse, because I think a lot of people are in danger of engaging with Romans 1 and becoming the sort of person that Paul is describing there, becoming a suppressor of the truth. A lot of people are already doing that, becoming somebody who ultimately approves of sin and approves of other people doing it and is doing it themselves. You cannot vote Democrat and be a Christian. You're not a Christian if you vote Democrat. That's a fact. There's no biblical ways around it. There's no theological loopholes. If you're telling yourself you can do that, you're lying to yourself and you're listening to your flesh. I don't even want to give credit to the devil. I don't think the devil is lying to most of the Americans. People will be like, oh, the devil is lying. The devil is getting in their ear and telling them they can be a Democrat. That's actually not, I don't think it's the devil most times. I don't think the devil is really working hard on the American church. I think the American church in their flesh and in their love for the world is doing most of the work for the devil. And so you're lying to yourself. You should vote for people who don't advocate for evil. And I'll just finish here by asking a question. Will you serve Christ or will you serve man? Because I think that's what this comes down to. Are you more interested in being liked by people, by telling people I voted for a Democrat, I'm liberal too, blah, 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 like being a part of the cultural, social imaginary, making sure that people like you? Is that what you're focused on? Because I think that's what a lot of you are focused on. That's what a lot of people are focused on today. A lot of Christians, they want to be liked. They don't actually want to do the right thing. They were Christians when it was culturally relevant. Now that it's not culturally relevant to be a Christian, they are trying to change Christianity into something that it isn't, into liberalism. And you can't do that. That's why J. Gresham Machen wrote the book Christianity and Liberalism. They're two different religions. You can't be a Christian and a liberal. You can't be a Christian and a Democrat. So I will end on that. I hope that you think about that as you go to the polls, as you go and vote. You should vote for Trump. You should vote for Hovde. If you're in Wisconsin, you should vote for Eric Olson, Eric Hovde, and Donald Trump. And you should stop lying to yourself if you're going to vote for a Democrat. Stop calling yourself a Christian at the very least. We'll see you guys in the next one.